Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to CWPP, which is Conversations with Passionate Professionals. Super stoked to have our next guest with us, Amelia. You know, let's chat. Let's get into it. Tell me where you're joining us from and where you're from originally.
Hey Jeff, thanks for having me. I now live in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
Originally born in northern Utah, but grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles.
All right.
Yeah, so I've been back in Utah about 10 years.
Okay. I didn't realize it was that long. I thought this was like you've been there 3 or 4 years. I
I
totally, man, that's a long time.
Yeah, I didn't expect to stay here that long, but
Okay.
I love it here.
Awesome. Now, you and I have a little bit in common as far as our ethnicity, and I love that because you have an amazing story. We're both, for all those listening, Mexican and Italian. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, I'll clarify. I was kind of adopted into a Mexican-Italian family.
Okay. Oh, then break it down for me. What's your ethnicity?
Both my mom and my dad were kind of both born and raised in Utah. So like European lineage, like that deep pioneer heritage that a lot of people from Utah kind of have.
Got it. So, you speak Spanish?
I'm not totally fluent.
All right.
I don't practice at home here, but when I go back to LA, it definitely my
Oh
grammar.
yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of people in LA are learning Spanish one way or another, right? So definitely. And then Italian. You speak Italian?
I'm learning Italian.
All right.
Yeah, so we have what was my grandfather's home that he was born and raised in southern Italy that we still have in the family, and eventually I think I'll spend a lot more time there, so it's important not just to learn proper Italian but the dialect.
Yeah, and I would be spending my time there as well. I was following you. You did this whole kind of mini series. It was like a picturesque blog of like that hometown, and it was super cool to follow all those roots. And I just find it fascinating because this the show is about learning about people, where they're from, the influences that bring them up. And I love just kind of setting the stage of the audience understanding like who you are, where you're from. And so usually we kick this thing off to say, growing up in a Mexican Italian household and having that type of influence when you were a kid, and someone were to ask you, what did you want to be when you grow up? What would you answer?
I think there's probably a few other contextual details
All right.
to explain when I talk about what I wanted to be when I grew up when I was a kid.
Go for it.
So my mom and my dad divorced when I was 3, and my dad came out of the closet. And then he met his now husband shortly after. So growing up, I lived with my dad's in LA. My mom lived in Seattle. When I was 10, we moved into a big house with my adoptive grandparents, so my other dad. And they are the Mexican-Italian ones. They're Mexican-Italian immigrants.
Okay.
And so we had this like really big, crazy, multi-generational household.
Yeah.
And a really interesting tension between, I had gay dads, and then I had these really traditional Catholic grandparents in the same households. Kind of two different value systems. My dad's just wanted to make sure I was doing well in school, but my grandparents were concerned about how marriageable I was going to be.
Wow. Okay, wait, real quick, because that was a lot. So let's kind of map this out. Your grandparents were your stepdad's parents that you were living with. Okay. Yeah. And you guys were all living together in one household. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Okay. So now they're concerned about you being marriageable. Like
Well, every night we would have dinner together around the table. For Mexicans and Italians, family and food go hand in hand.
Heck yeah, love that.
And so we'd have these really funny dinner conversations. One time my grandpa turned to me in his really thick Italian accent, and he's like, "Hey, Amelia, when are you going to get married?" I was 16.
Yeah.
My dad's almost spat out their food.
That's funny.
It was just funny.
I love that.
But getting back to the question of what I wanted to be when I grew up, early on, politics were something that I was aware of because there were several rounds of legislation where gay marriage was put up for a vote in California. And so having, gay parents meant that this hit me right at home. I remember the first time the gay marriage was put up for a public vote was Prop 22 in the year 2000, and I was 7.
Wow.
So, I think maybe there's aspects of my story that seem political, but they're only political because aspects of my family have been politicized.
Yeah.
because I was growing up like with aspects of my identity that were up for public debate.
Oh.
So I see people with like picket signs, or signs in their shop windows, and I remember just being like keenly aware of and sad, wondering why people don't think that my parents should be married.
Wow.
And then the children of gay parents were also kind of part of this public discourse.
Yeah.
My dads are amazing parents, so this was kind of an isolating experience, and I really wanted to understand the systems at play, that influenced politics and influenced minorities who have aspects of their identities, whether it's their race or their orientation, that are kind of part of that public discourse or up for a vote. So I thought I wanted to be a human rights attorney.
Okay, so immediately, age 15 or 16, you're like, are you fascinated by? And when I say fascinated, meaning you just said something where you wanted to know the ins and outs of what allowed for things to be the way they were, and politically charged to now. Were you like, okay, I want to be a politician? You jumped right into a very specific role, right? And at the age of 16, oh yeah, human rights attorney, I'm all in.
I think there were a couple of times where gay marriage was on the ballot.
Yeah.
The next time I was in high school. And again, like people picketing on street corners. So I remember we would drive past them every day on the way to school. And a lot of those signs that people held up were really hateful. And so I think like my political engagement, maybe the most meaningful first act was I made my own sign, and it was, I love my gay parents. And like we went out there and we held it up, and it was like a message of love. Yeah. But yeah, I was fascinated. I am fascinated by like, how did we get here? Why is this even in the public eye? Like,
this is California too, right? So
yeah, it's California, but it was a suburb of LA, northern LA, called Valencia or Santa Clarita. That's
I know where that is.
Demographically, like more conservative than a lot of other parts of California.
Yeah. Okay, so we're fast forwarding a little bit of this journey now of just, I'm sure that grew over time of wanting to get involved in politics, and now in high school you're pretty spot on then of what you wanted to be when you grew up.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize that I was a minority. I just knew that like this part of my family was in the public eye and hotly debated, and I had an empathy for minorities or people who I felt like were underrepresented or misunderstood or like the underdog. So it wasn't just with regard to like LGBTQ plus issues that I wanted to be a human rights attorney. It was just sort of a deep empathy with people that I perceived as like getting the short end of the stick. I had this high school speech coach who very similarly, I grew up in a kind of urban neighborhood here in the Bay Area where he ran a speech and debate team. And this was usually for schools that were private, upper echelon of, running a program like this of this caliber. And our public school was ran by a very wise person who had his master's and a very strong Black man in our community. And our team represented that. We had Latinos, we had Mexicans. And there's one thing that he said that what your story is reminding me of, being a voice for the voiceless. Basically, what can we do to be able to represent the minority or the people who are underserved? And so, yeah, I'm loving where this conversation is going. I feel like we have even more now in common of kind of stepping up to represent kind of the folks who are getting that short end of the stick. So what were those next steps that you took to kind of see this out? I mean, the question was, what are you going to be when you grow up? Did you start pursuing that, like going to school? Yeah. So, I think early on, I wouldn't have articulated it this way, but I felt a sense of wanting to advocate for people. So I went to school in the Bay Area. I studied political science with an emphasis in pre-law, and
which is awesome because I can't wait for people to hear what you do now. So
I think like one of the most interesting classes to me was political quantitative data analysis, and basically looking at poll data and like understanding all of the different demographic variables that influence public opinion or how people vote. And, this major, it has absolutely nothing to do with what I do now career-wise.
Sure.
It did give me a deeper understanding of some of our systems, that influenced so much of my childhood. I was really like on the edge of my seat in all of my college lectures.
Mm. So straight A student then.
I did pretty well. I
Okay.
loved it. I loved it.
All right, cool.
I interned at San Francisco Superior Court for a couple years, and I sat in on a lot of court proceedings, did a lot of admin work for a judge that I was interning for, and she oversaw the foster care and adoption calendar. So not necessarily like the specific, facet of law I thought I was interested in, but I don't know. I came away with that not feeling a lot of really strong motivation to immediately pursue law school. I just didn't feel it in my gut. So I was sort of at an impasse. I was living in San Francisco at the height of the tech boom, broke.
In the Bay Area.
In the Bay
Area and broke.
It was really stressful. And so one day I called my mom and just was venting about it. I was like waiting tables in the Marina District, and had a hard day, called her to vent, and her husband, who was a patent attorney, picked up the phone, and he's like, just move here. They lived in Utah. Move here. You can help me draft patent applications. Then you can find something more permanent. And he made this promise to me that I don't even know if it had real basis, but it's like, I promise you that your career is going to take off. The tech scene here is going to blow up
in Utah.
Just trust me.
Yeah. Which is,
it was tech patent, so he had some level of insight.
Okay. Yeah.
So 2 weeks after that phone call, I had picked up and moved my entire life.
Okay. So there's, again, I love these conversations because I'm trying to be if I were listening in, I would, an audience member, like, wait 1 second. So we heard a bunch about your dads early on. So did you also stay close with your mom? Was there were you going and living, or how does mom come back in the picture where you're at? Feels like this pivotal moment of I need to call. I was waiting. I thought you might call your dads, but you called your mom. So
so my mom, when I was 7, she had remarried and she moved to Seattle.
Okay.
And so from the age of 7 on, I flew unaccompanied back and forth between LA and Seattle 3 or 4 times a year.
Oh wow!
Just an airbait. 60,000 miles by the time I was 15 or something like that.
Golden wings, yeah, crazy. Yeah. So mom was definitely a part of the upbringing too. And
definitely.
Cool. I just wanted to bring us all in. We're tracking. I'm thoroughly involved in where this is headed. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I say I have gay dads, but the reality is for a lot of kids who have gay parents is their families are mixed. They might not necessarily not have a mom, or
right.
Like me, I had my mom and remarried, and so I had 2 gay dads, and then my mom remarried, so there's a straight dad in the picture too.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, you have a diversity of parent, a lot going on right now. Adopted, a Mexican, Spanish household, gay dads, grandparents living in home, multi-generational upbringing, right? Mother, then remarried, now have a stepfather, and then not mom and new stepdad and mom are down the street or an hour away. They're hours away where you have to fly back and forth. So this is really, really cool and interesting to hear all of the influence I think that is stirring up inside of you. Now you're living in the Bay Area and you're broke after college and studying something that you thought you were really passionate about, and you got 2 weeks to think about what's going on. You're like, all right, I'm going to do it. So now you're up in everything and go to Utah?
Yeah. So my mom had moved back to Utah. She'd moved back. And yeah, I just had this really strong gut feeling. I had this completely unfounded faith that my career is going to take off. In what? I have no idea. Let's just do it. And then I also had this really, really strong feeling I needed to be with my mom. I needed to spend time with her, and then it couldn't wait. And so we'll get back to that. So I moved into my uncle's basement.
So got some family members willing to help. I love it.
Yeah, I didn't have, I was working on contract with my stepdad, so I didn't have a full-time job, a car, or a plan. I just had a feeling.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, I did find a job, though. I was an executive assistant at a really small little tech firm that built e-filing software for court systems.
Nice.
Getting, paper filing systems electronic. All country. So
Mhm.
my day to day at first was really boring, and I've learned that I don't handle mental boredom in a professional context very well. So I would finish, like my expense reports in the morning by like 10
Mhm.
a.m. and I
Mhm.
would go around the software firm and ask people to give me stuff to do.
Yeah.
So
Very proactive. I love it.
board. So I went to the QA department, and I started doing like regression testing, and I started taking support calls.
Mm.
I learned the ins and outs of the product so well that a project management position had opened up maybe a year and a half in at this company.
Mhm.
They gave me a shot. I was going to do implementation and configuration for all of these e-filing projects. So travel to court systems in like,
Mhm.
the middle of nowhere and help
And
them.
at this point of this conjunction, because your career path is now changing, I think we were really invested in you becoming this amazing lawyer based off of you being at the edge of your seat in college in these lectures. At this point in your story, are you like mindfully thinking I'm making a shift out of that, or was that just something that was put on the back burner that you knew was still there, and you didn't necessarily like, where are you at in your mind, like,
Yeah.
thought process of becoming this lawyer?
So I really didn't feel so. I worked with patent attorneys, worked at
Mhm.
the San Francisco Superior Court, and now working actively with many more attorneys
Mhm.
for this legal filing software. And it wasn't pulling me in.
Okay. Okay, so we're
Like, yeah,
starting to shift away from
a
that
little bit.
initial
Like
vision. Yeah.
maybe not law school. I was exploring other things kind of outside of this desk job that I had. I was
But
thinking,
what was it? What was it? What was you, I mean, you say, like, you didn't like it. It wasn't what you thought it would be, right? Like,
well, all the attorneys I talked to were really deeply unhappy.
okay. Okay.
And I have learned something about myself,
Mhm.
and that's I make really big life decisions based on like gut feeling and a sense of inspiration. And, when you're 20 or 21, like
Mhm.
the stakes are pretty low. Like you
Mhm.
can do that. And that's where I was at this point to just kind of give myself some time and feel it out. And, at first this job at this small legal tech firm was just a way to like make
Mhm.
my car payment, but it started to be interesting to me, intellectually. So I got Scrum certified. So anybody in like the software industry is like knows what that is. It's
Yeah.
moving this engineering team to agile processes at this little tech firm. And I got an interview at a startup that had just been acquired. Totally, it was the first time it was a full departure away from anything that had to do with the legal
Right.
world. But I got this interview, and I was honestly so nervous. I felt like a really big sense of imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
I didn't feel like I was qualified. I told my mom about this interview, and it's funny, the day of the interview, I was getting on the freeway and I look over at the lane next to me, and my mom is in her car chasing me to this interview, like shaking her fist at me. Like she did not want me to chicken out.
Oh, wow. So she's making sure you're gonna go.
Yeah, she's making sure I'm going to go. She had given me
That's
this pep
that's
talk
awesome.
before. She's like, "You ask for more money than you think you're worth." Like,
Wow.
yeah. So, she was kind of a big cheerleader for me
Yeah, I love
in
that.
early career, just taking chances and just having like blind faith in myself. And so I
Mhm.
got the job.
Yeah.
And I had worked as a project manager or scrum master for maybe a total of like 3.5 or 4 years when I made a
Mhm.
transition to product management.
Okay.
And I think that's really because I wanted to really understand the problems at hand. And I
Yeah.
really wanted to make sure that we understood why we were building something,
Mhm.
to make sure that what we built really did solve somebody's pain point and
Yeah.
solve customer need.
I'm seeing a connection here. I'm really seeing a connection from where we started on you as a child wanting to know the ins and out of political decision making and why things ended up being the way they were and
Yeah.
not liking the outcome. And now here you are all these years later finding a passion, if you will, and wanting to know the ins and out of how things were made so that there is a good outcome
Yeah.
in what you do. And
Yeah. Totally.
yeah,
And advocating for the user, fight for the
that,
user.
that's
Um,
right.
and advocate for your team.
Mhm.
So one thing that I love about working in product
Mhm.
is the teams that I get to work with really function as meritocracies.
Mm.
It's not about the big person in charge having the idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's about testing out ideas in a pragmatic way. Doesn't matter who came up with the idea, and seeing, may the best idea win. And I love that feeling of having everybody on my teams really leaned in and passionate about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I love being surrounded by people who enjoy problem solving.
That's awesome. So pause real quick, because all of our audience is at the edge of their seat saying, well, what is it that she does now? Officially introduce yourself and the role that you're in today.
Yeah. So right now I'm a group product manager, which means that I'm not an individual contributor, but I manage other product managers who lead their own respective engineering teams at a company called Lucid Software, which is great.
Yes. Great company.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love them. Lucid Software is if I were to, I got people like my parents on that are like, what is that? It is a digital brainstorming tool, but also there's Lucid Chart, right? There are other apps within Lucid Software, but basically an ability to map out processes or work within agile teams to set milestones and brainstorm. I use it every day. So hopefully I said that correctly, but if you want to give your pitch on what Lucid is for the audience, what is Lucid?
Yeah, we empower teams to see and build the future.
Look at that.
So really enabling everybody on your teams to collaborate really efficiently.
All done through the cloud, multiple users and one pane of glass, if you will. But wow, so crazy. Okay, so now we know where you are and what you do. That was an amazing, I think, journey of how you got there. I think now that you're in this role and you look back at all of those moments, right? There were some key moments that kind of triggered you, especially the influence your mom had in your life. I would ask this question because I think it's a good follow-up. You say that a lot of the big stuff is inspired by a gut feeling or something just pushing you like, nope, I just feel the move to go. Was that the right move now looking back to pack up bags in San Francisco and move to Utah?
Yeah, it floors me how pivotal that decision was.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had people around me who, given how fast I made that decision to move, were like kind of concerned.
Yeah.
What's doing?
Right.
But it was single most influential decision I ever made. My hunch about my career, absolutely correct.
Yep.
And then the second hunch of needing to be near my mom. Also totally spot on. 2 years after I moved here, she passed away in a motorcycle accident.
Oh my goodness.
So I got those 2 amazing years with her. And if I hadn't listened to that feeling in my gut, I wouldn't have had that time.
Yeah, that's first of all, sorry to hear that about your mom, but also really happy you took that leap of faith and took that risk, because that's amazing that you got that time. And I think on this show we talk a lot about taking risks or being conservative or listening to that heat of wisdom or not. And I think this is a great example of listening to your gut and taking the risk. And if someone were listening and they're in a spot right now where they're deciding, hey, should I take this risk and do it? What would be like that word of advice to maybe leaning into that feeling? Or how is there a process? Do you just do it? Do you just say 1, 2, 3 and go? And what would you tell that person who's on the fence, feeling like they should, but feeling like, man, that's a really big risk?
Yeah. For me, it's really interesting. I've never really had a very well charted plan about, when you're in high school, you're pressured a lot to pick a major, you better know what you want to do, but you don't have to do the thing that you got your degree in. In my case, my degree satiated a lot of curiosity for me and gave me kind of this ability to do systems level thinking. But it has nothing to do with what I do in my career, and I love my career. So just be flexible. Don't be so afraid that you have to have this super rigid plan.
Yeah, I love that.
To succeed. And then one thing for me, and I know, lots of people have other ways of making huge life decisions. But for me, if I can visualize it and I start to get really excited about it, or I start to really fixate on something and feel inspired, then for me, that's the tipping
And when you say visualize it, is this like, do you have like a vision board, or are you closing your eyes and seeing it in your mind? What do you mean when you say visualize it?
For me, it's all mental. And I was thinking about moving here. I had, kind of two images in my head. One of them was riding motorcycles with my mom, and just that feeling of like, I am where I'm supposed to be.
Are these Harleys or like sport bikes? Okay. Yeah.
And then the other one was I just had this feeling, I had a mental image of driving home from work. And just feeling like, wow, my brain is really happy because I got to do interesting stuff, and my career is this validating place. And especially through that experience of grieving my mom, my career, and you pointed this out, I don't know if I'd made that connection. My career was a place where I could apply my curiosity to understand how a system works to actually yield a result or solve a problem. So when my grief and my personal life didn't feel like it was in a good space, I was able to apply myself at work in a way that felt really validating and constructive.
That's awesome. That's so cool to see that like really come full circle. And I think it's really important because this is what the show is about. What I think the emphasis of why I started this whole conversations with people who are passionate about what they do, whatever, is because no one told me growing up, hey, you could be all of these. You could be a group product manager. I never knew anything. It was a doctor, a lawyer, or a firefighter, policeman, like these big ideas. And what's interesting is they try to give you this map to say, you need to make all the right grades in school. You need to go to this university. You need to have all of these things fall into place and cookie cutter. You went to college to study that, then that's what you should be doing. And I love your story because it really isn't any of that. I think it has elements of, right, yes, you got to do good in school. I think you should go to college to learn. But it was the exterior things that you were absorbing from family, from college, from what makes you tick to end up into a role that is super cool, leading how many teams of engineers? Is it 8?
8.
Yeah, crazy. And I think that's really awesome. So thank you so much for sharing that. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And I think one thing as we get ready to wrap up here that I always like asking our guests for the audience, and I feel like we did some of this already. There's so many good nuggets in here, but for you, if you were to leave like one piece of advice to all those listening, what would that advice be? And it could be now outside of the realms of what we talked about. It's just, hey, this is what I like to leave people with to think about.
Okay. Well, if we have time, I think I have two things.
Let's tackle both of them. Yes, please.
So within the realm of software development or tech, I think one thing I really value and encourage people to be mindful of is nurturing a team dynamic that is really vulnerable and emotionally safe.
Okay, real quick. Yeah. That is phenomenal, but I need you to unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
So kind of hearkening back to the idea of meritocracy, like everybody can bring their ideas forward. Everybody is heard.
Does that not happen?
Sometimes, depending on the culture where you're at, it may not happen. Or you might have people on the team who are hesitant to speak up.
Okay.
But I really believe that your end result is going to be so much stronger if everybody is leaning in and bringing their perspective to the table.
And how do you foster that? How do you foster that type of community?
As a leader, not claiming to know all the answers, especially in a leadership role, you might feel pressured, like you have to know all the answers, but that's the case. You're surrounded by smart people to help you on that journey to find the right answer. And I think one of the key indicators to me of a successful team is how much they laugh together.
Okay.
So, I really want everybody to feel emotionally safe and vulnerable so we can goof off. Like trolling is a love language on engineering teams.
Do you guys troll with memes, like over Slack?
Every form of trolling. But these, to form a really high performing team, you have to form an emotionally safe team.
I love it.
So that's one nugget. And then the other one I think is much more personal and kind of back to the topic of grief. The experience of losing my mom gave me, I think, it was awful, but it was the most transformative experience of my whole life. It showed me how deeply I am capable of loving and how strong I am capable of being. So
why do you say that? Why do you say it showed you how capable you were of loving?
So Glennon Doyle has this quote that grief is basically a receipt that you carry for how much you loved somebody. And so, yeah, it feels really heavy. Like that's a long receipt sometimes, but you carry that proudly, you know? And to me, in that way, like grief is almost sacred. Like it's evidence of how much you love. So I, you know, in my personal life, on and off, I've worked with hospice patients because I feel like I can sit with people when they're going through this pain of grief or anticipatory grief. And I met myself so much more deeply through grief than I would have otherwise. And so for anybody who, you know, is going through that kind of loss, just know that the experience can make you more empathetic and can make you stronger. And you'll be a more self-actualized person, you know, if you transmute that pain.
I love that. I mean, I think that's really important because sometimes we try to suppress grief or run away from it. And similarly, we're kind of grieving in my family. My mother-in-law is going through a process now of ALS, and it's been a tough 2 years to see someone you love slow down and can't do the things. And with my wife, I will let her grieve with her, and we will talk about those moments of how are you feeling, or talk to me about how that makes you feel, and instead of ignoring it, right? Or saying, "Oh no, toughen up," wipe that tear away from your eye. I'm more of the same in that sense of cry it out. Let's talk about it, and let's be thankful for all the time that we do have right now to cherish this moment. So,
yeah, just hold space for somebody when they're in that position. Not to positivity, wash or be toxically positive about saying, this will make you stronger, but just lean in. You're muted, I think.
Look at me. I was going off on how lean in was such a good tagline to kind of wrap up with. I think we've saw you lean in a bunch of areas throughout this story. And so thank you so much for leaning in with us today. I think that's definitely something I'm going to kind of take right now in the season I am in my life. So I appreciate having you. It's always good to catch up. You are an amazing individual. I knew from the moment I met you, was like, okay, how am I going to get to ask her to be on my podcast? It's like one of the first things. I was like, let me build some rapport. Let's build the relationship before I just ask something of her. But seriously, I love your story. I think our audience will really have some great things to take away from it. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Tune in to the next episode here in season 2 of Conversation with Passionate Professionals. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.